There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, so quiet that the world doesn't notice, but your soul does. It often happens somewhere between your 65th and 70th birthday. The retirement party is over. The gifts are unwrapped, the calendar, suddenly empty, and for the first time in decades, you wake up with no alarm clock. And no clear reason to get out of bed. You look in the mirror, same face, a little more lined, a little softer around the edges, but inside, something deeper stirs, something that whispers, "Now what?" It's not fear, not exactly, it's not sadness either, it's the eerie quiet of life changing without asking for your permission. No more meetings. No more raising children, no more 9 to 5, the identity you wore like a suit, parent, boss, provider, caregiver, has quietly fallen to the floor, and what's left is you, raw, real, undressed from duty. This is the silent turning point. The world calls it retirement, but for your spirit, it's something much bigger. It's the beginning of a new chapter, not the epilogue, not the end credits, but the second soul of your life, where wisdom replaces ambition and peace becomes your pursuit. Yet here's the hidden danger: many people over 65 fail to see this as a beginning. They treat it like a slow waiting room to the end, TV reruns, bitter complaints, a shrinking social circle. And then they wonder why their energy fades, why their days blur together, why their health slips faster than expected. But what if this could be the most important decade of your life? What if 65 to 80 isn't when you fade, but when you finally come home to yourself? In this new chapter, you don't need to run faster, climb higher, or prove anything to anyone. You don't even need the world to notice you. What you need is to master the 5 silent wisdoms that separate the tired, bitter elderly from the radiant, peaceful, and deeply alive ones. These 5 truths don't just protect your health, they transform your spirit, they restore your dignity, and they make you dangerously free, free from fear, from regret, and from the illusion that your best days are behind you. So before we go any further, let me ask you something. Are you ready to begin? Not your retirement, but your awakening, because now we'll step into the first wisdom, a lesson more powerful than medicine, more healing than time, a truth that can extend your life simply by how you see it. It's the wisdom of letting go. Let's begin. We spend our whole lives trying to hold on to our jobs, our children, our identities, to being right, to being needed, to being in control. But here's the great twist of aging: just as we begin to finally understand life, life starts asking us to release it. Have you noticed it? The body won't obey like it used to. Your knees argue back, your memory skips a beat, your schedule, once packed, now quiet, and slowly, without warning, the things you once controlled begin to slip through your fingers like sand. Now here's the secret that no one tells you: it's not the loss of control that ages you faster, it's the refusal to let go of control. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Raymond. He was a corporate executive for 35 years, the kind of man who scheduled breakfast down to the minute. He ran meetings, budgets, people's futures. He had authority. He had precision. He had power. Then came retirement. The office stopped calling. The phone was silent. He tried managing the house like it was a boardroom, nagging his wife, timing her gardening, even giving feedback on how she loaded the dishwasher. At first, it was funny, then it was frustrating, then it was lonely. Raymond didn't miss his job, he missed control, and the more he tried to grip it, the more bitter and tired he became. His blood pressure rose, his smile vanished, his soul shrinking. But one morning, something changed. He was watching the tree outside his window lose its leaves. Autumn had arrived, and in that silence, a thought hit him: the tree doesn't fight the season, it lets go, so it can bloom again. That day, Raymond decided to stop clinging. He apologized more, he listened longer, he smiled without needing to win. And something extraordinary happened. His energy returned, his sleep improved, he started laughing again. Letting go didn't make him weaker, it made him lighter, and science agrees. Studies show that the constant need for control, especially in older adults, leads to higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone linked to inflammation, heart disease, and accelerated aging. But those who practice acceptance, surrender, and emotional flexibility, they show better immune function, sharper memory, and a longer lifespan. The truth is, letting go is not giving up. It's growing up. It's saying, I no longer need to control the world, I just need to control how I respond to it. And that, my friend, is real power, the kind that doesn't wrinkle with age, the kind that doesn't rust with time. You see, youth fights, but wisdom flows, and those who flow, who ride the currents of life with grace, don't drown in old age, they glide through it. So what are you still holding on to? Old arguments, unrealistic expectations of your body, bitterness about what should have been, whatever it is. Breathe in, now exhale. And let it go, because once you release the need to control everything, you finally gain control over the one thing that truly matters. Your peace. Now, with your hands a little emptier and your heart a little lighter, you're ready for the next wisdom, the power of purpose, because retirement without purpose is just a quiet way of dying. Let's keep going. A calendar without purpose is just a countdown. A life without meaning is just survival on repeat. Most people think retirement is freedom, and for the first few months, it feels like it. No alarms, no meetings, no deadlines, just coffee in the morning and silence all day. But then, slowly, quietly, that silence turns into emptiness, and that coffee, it tastes more like delay than delight. You start to notice something. Time is no longer your enemy, it's your mirror, and if you have no purpose staring back at you, you begin to fade, not just in energy, but in essence. Let me tell you about Margaret. She was a high school teacher for 42 years, tough, smart, purpose-driven. Her students adored her. She woke up every morning with fire in her bones, not because she had to, but because she meant something to someone. Then she retired. At first, she slept in, traveled, read novels, took long walks. It was peaceful, until one night she confessed to her daughter, I feel invisible. She wasn't sick, she wasn't broke, but she was drifting, and that kind of spiritual drifting, it can kill faster than disease. But here's where the story shifts. One afternoon, Margaret was watching her neighbor's daughter struggle with her homework. She walked over, sat beside her, and just like that, the teacher in her woke up. She started tutoring twice a week. Then 3, then she helped organize a small learning circle for retired teachers. Margaret found purpose again, and with it came something miraculous. Her sleep improved, her energy returned, her mind grew sharper, her joy was reborn. Science backs this up. Multiple studies confirm that older adults who engage in purposeful activities, whether it's volunteering, mentoring, or even gardening with intention, live longer, healthier, and happier lives. Purpose isn't just an emotional luxury, it's biological fuel. It strengthens the immune system, lowers the risk of Alzheimer's, even reduces the chance of stroke and heart attack. But here's the part that no one tells you. Purpose doesn't mean productivity, it means connection. You don't need to start a company, you don't need to run a marathon, you just need to be needed by something bigger than your own comfort. It can be a grandchild who learns your stories, a garden that depends on your care, a lonely neighbor who lights up when you knock, a morning journal where you pass your wisdom to the next generation. You see, retirement is not the end of contribution, it's the beginning of your legacy. Because the truth is, without purpose, every day feels longer. With purpose, every day feels lighter. And you, my friend, are not done yet. Not by a long shot. Your purpose didn't retire just because you did. It's waiting, right outside your door, right inside your soul. All it needs is for you to say yes. So now, with clarity in your heart and meaning in your step, you're ready to receive the next great wisdom. The strength of slowing down. Why moving slower after 65 doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've finally learned what matters. Take care of your body, it's the only place you have to live. Jim Rohn, by the time you reach 65, you start to understand something younger people often overlook. Health is not a blessing, it is a responsibility. it's not about looking younger in the mirror, it's about feeling alive in your bones. You see, when we talk about wealth and old age, most people think of money, but I've met men with million-dollar pensions who can't walk up a flight of stairs without gasping for breath. And I've met grandmothers with aching joints and humble means. Yet their eyes sparkle, their laughs are deep, and their presence heals the room. So let me say it clearly, self-respect begins with how you treat your body. Not out of vanity, but out of dignity, because when you care for your health, you're not just adding years to your life, you're adding life to your years. Let me tell you a story of a man named George, 78 years old, former construction worker, never rich, never famous, but every morning at 6 a.m., without fail, he walks 2 miles around the neighborhood, rain or shine. One day, a young man asked him, "Why do you walk every day? You're already old, isn't it too late to make a difference?" George smiled and replied, "Son, I don't walk to add more years to my life, I walk so I don't waste the ones I already have." That is daily self-respect. It's not about perfection. It's about intention. Every healthy meal you prepare, every bottle of water you drink, every stretch, every step, every moment of deep breathing, it's not small, it's sacred, because it says, I still value myself enough to care. Now let's be honest, aging brings limitations. You won't move like you used to, you'll have days when your knees ache, your back protests, your energy dips, that's real. But self-respect isn't about fighting time, it's about honoring it, and honoring yourself. In this time, it means getting up when your body tells you to move, resting when your soul needs quiet, saying no to foods that harm, saying yes to habits that heal, scheduling your doctor's visits not out of fear, but out of love, because here's a truth that shakes many to their core: if you ignore your health for too long, it will become the only thing you care about, but if you nurture it, like a quiet garden, like an old friendship, like a flame that still wants to burn, you'll gain something priceless: the ability to walk without fear, the strength to hold your grandchildren, the clarity to enjoy conversations, the freedom to wake up without dread. That is wealth, that is power, that is self-respect in its purest form. So today, I ask you this: when was the last time you treated your body like a sacred home? When was the last time you thanked your lungs for breathing, your legs for carrying you, your eyes for seeing beauty? Because at this age, health is not about being young again, it's about being present, it's about showing up for yourself, every day, no matter what, and once you do, you'll unlock something even greater, the freedom of simplicity. Why less? After 65 is actually more, that's our next chapter, but before we go there, pause, take a breath, feel your heart beating. That's not just a rhythm, that's your body telling you it's ready to be respected. Take care of your body, it's the only place you have to live. Jim Rohn: by the time you reach 65, you start to understand something younger people often overlook: health is not a blessing, it is a responsibility. It's not about looking younger in the mirror, it's about feeling alive in your bones. You see, when we talk about wealth and old age, most people think of money, but I've met men with million-dollar pensions who can't walk up a flight of stairs without gasping for breath. And I've met grandmothers with aching joints and humble means. Yet their eyes sparkle, their laughs are deep, and their presence heals the room. So let me say it clearly, self-respect begins with how you treat your body. Not out of vanity, but out of dignity, because when you care for your health, you're not just adding years to your life, you're adding life to your years. Let me tell you a story of a man named George, 78 years old, former construction worker, never rich, never famous, but every morning at 6 a.m., without fail, he walks 2 miles around the neighborhood, rain or shine. One day, a young man asked him, "Why do you walk every day? You're already old, isn't it too late to make a difference?" George smiled and replied, "Son, I don't walk to add more years to my life, I walk so I don't waste the ones I already have." That is daily self-respect. It's not about perfection. It's about intention. Every healthy meal you prepare, every bottle of water you drink, every stretch, every step, every moment of deep breathing, it's not small, it's sacred, because it says, I still value myself enough to care. Now let's be honest, aging brings limitations. You won't move like you used to, you'll have days when your knees ache, your back protests, your energy dips, that's real, but self-respect isn't about fighting time, it's about honoring it, and honoring yourself. In this time, it means getting up when your body tells you to move, resting when your soul needs quiet, saying no to foods that harm, saying yes to habits that heal, scheduling your doctor's visits not out of fear, but out of love, because here's a truth that shakes many to their core: if you ignore your health for too long, it will become the only thing you care about. But if you nurture it, like a quiet garden, like an old friendship, like a flame that still wants to burn, you'll gain something priceless: the ability to walk without fear, the strength to hold your grandchildren, the clarity to enjoy conversations, the freedom to wake up without dread. That is wealth, that is power, that is self-respect in its purest form. So today, I ask you this: when was the last time you treated your body like a sacred home? When was the last time you thanked your lungs for breathing, your legs for carrying you, your eyes for seeing beauty? Because at this age, health is not about being young again, it's about being present, it's about showing up for yourself every day, no matter what, and once you do, you'll unlock something even greater: the freedom of simplicity. Why less after 65 is actually more. The quality of your life is directly proportional to the quality of your relationships. Tony Robbins: at 65 and beyond, your body may feel the weight of years, but it's your heart, your emotional world, that can either lift you higher or slowly drain your life force away. Think about it: who do you spend your time with? Who fills your days with laughter or shadows? Because emotional leaks, those small, silent wounds, are far more dangerous than you realize. They drain your energy, cloud your mind, and shrink your joy. Let me tell you about Helen and James, married for over 40 years. They'd lived through good times and bad, but as retirement settled in, the silence between them grew louder than words. James felt ignored, Helen felt unappreciated, each resentment a tiny crack in their once solid foundation. They drifted, like two ships passing in the night, until one day, Helen said to James, "If we don't fix this, I'm afraid we'll lose each other, not because of time, but because of the space we've created between us." So they started something small, something brave, a daily habit of sharing one thing they appreciated about each other: no arguments, no criticism, just gratitude. Slowly, the cracks began to heal, their home filled again with warmth, their hearts remembered why they fell in love, and their souls found refuge. Not in silence, but in connection. Here's the truth: retirement is often a test of relationships, because the busyness of life once masked the cracks, but when the noise fades, emotions surface. You may face unspoken hurts, lingering regrets, fear of becoming irrelevant, or loneliness even in a crowded room, but these are not signs of failure, they are invitations, invitations to heal, to forgive, to open doors that may have been shut for years. And sometimes, the most radical act of self-love is to fix your emotional leaks. It means saying the hard truths with kindness, letting go of grudges that chain your spirit, choosing presence over perfection, learning to listen, not just hear, your loved ones, because relationships are not just about history, they're about renewal, and when you renew, you heal your soul, you gain energy you didn't know was lost, you reclaim joy, you create a sanctuary where love, not pain, becomes your daily bread. So ask yourself, what emotional leaks am I ignoring? Who do I need to forgive, including myself? How can I rebuild bridges before the winter of my life? Because, my friend, no one can fill your soul's emptiness better than authentic connection. And here's a secret: healing relationships heals you first. It strengthens your heart, it sharpens your mind, it fuels your spirit, and it reminds you that, even after 65, you are worthy of love, deep, lasting, and soul-nourishing. Now, with your heart patched and your soul recharged, we're ready to explore the final wisdom that ties it all together. Gratitude turns what we have into enough, and more. It turns denial into acceptance, chaos to order, confusion to clarity. It makes sense of our past, brings peace for today, and creates a vision for tomorrow. Melody Beatty. As the years accumulate, many rush to chase what's lost: youth, strength, time. But what if the real treasure isn't something you can grasp or hold? What if the secret to a happier, healthier retirement is hidden in the simple act of being present, of noticing what is, not what was or might be? This is where gratitude and mindfulness meet, two silent, powerful allies that heal the wounds aging brings. Gratitude is not just saying thank you. It's a deep awareness that life, with all its imperfections, still offers gifts every single day. It's waking up and feeling the sun's warmth on your face. It's the taste of your morning tea, the sound of birds outside your window, the hug from a loved one. Mindfulness is the practice of fully inhabiting these moments, without judgment or distraction. Together, they are antidotes to anxiety, loneliness, and despair that often creep in with age. Let me share a story about Margaret, 72 years old, recently widowed. The silence in her home was deafening. She felt lost, caught between grief and the slow ticking of the clock. But then she found a small journal and began to write, each morning. Just 3 things she was grateful for. At first, it was hard. Some days she wrote, a warm cup of coffee. Other days, a memory of his laugh. Slowly, those words became a lifeline. They tethered her to the present, to beauty, to hope. And with mindfulness, she learned to sit with her feelings. No running away, no resistance. Grief didn't disappear overnight, but it softened. She found peace in the ebb and flow of her emotions, rather than fighting the tide. Science supports what Margaret discovered. Gratitude lowers stress hormones. Mindfulness improves immune function. Both increase feelings of happiness and connection. So if you want to master aging with grace and joy, start with this. Notice the small gifts. Be here now. Let gratitude and mindfulness be your daily rituals. It doesn't require grand gestures, just presence, just attention, just a quiet heart willing to see the good, even in hard times. Because this, my friend, is how you cultivate a life overflowing with meaning. Long after the candles on your birthday cake grow fewer, as you breathe out today, say thank you. As you breathe in tomorrow, be fully here, and when you do, you'll discover something remarkable. Aging is not a curse to endure, but a journey to embrace, rich with wisdom, grace, and unexpected joy. Next, we will close our journey with the final chapter, a gentle but powerful reminder of all you've learned. Do not grow old, no matter how long you live. Never cease to stand like curious children, before the great mystery. Albert Einstein. Here we stand at the threshold, the closing chapter of a journey that began with uncertainty, but now unfolds into clarity. Aging is not simply the passage of time, it is a rebirth, a profound transformation, where the layers of life peel away, revealing the true essence beneath. You are no longer just your years, you are the wisdom gathered from every joy, every struggle, every tear, and every laugh. You are the sum of lessons learned, the courage to let go, the strength to rebuild, the grace to forgive, and the love to reconnect. In this rebirth, you become ageless, not because you defy time, but because you transcend it. You carry a light that no wrinkle can dim, a spirit that no ache can silence, and a heart that no fear can cage. What does it mean to be ageless through wisdom? It means embracing every moment with curiosity, like a child marveling at the world anew. It means seeing your reflection and feeling pride, not in youth's fleeting beauty, but in the depth of your character, the kindness you've sown, and the legacy you're still crafting. Your life is a story in progress, a masterpiece painted with the colors of resilience, hope, and purpose. Remember Helen and James, Margaret and her gratitude journal? Their stories are your stories. Their triumphs are proof that the final chapters can be the richest and most vibrant. This is your time to shine, not in spite of age, but because of it. To become ageless through wisdom means to live fully, deeply, and authentically. It means walking forward with peace in your heart and fire in your soul. So, as you close this chapter, ask yourself, who am I becoming? What legacy do I want to leave? How will I use my wisdom to light the way for others? The answers lie within you, waiting to be awakened, waiting to be shared. And now, the final truth. you are not defined by the years behind, but by the life you choose today. The rebirth of you is happening, with every breath, every choice, every moment of love and courage. Step forward, ageless soul, your story is just beginning. Thank you for walking this path with me. May your retirement be not just years of rest, but a vibrant dance of wisdom and joy, for yourself and those who follow your light.